In those parched lands of Anatolia, where the winter cuts like a blade and the summer scorches until one can no longer breathe, there was a vast town where even the wind seemed to blow with a heavy sorrow. In this town lived two brothers, known to everyone. One was Mustafa, a man whose heart overflowed with mercy, who would share even his last morsel with a neighbor, known as a father to the poor and the destitute. The other was his polar opposite, his elder brother Hasan, a man blinded by the lust for money, who valued a single penny in his pocket more than life itself, and who cared for nothing but his own interest. Mustafa had no desire for worldly possessions. The honest bread earned by the sweat of his brow and his only son, Ali, who had just turned 10 and whom he loved more than life, were enough for him. Ali's mother had succumbed to a relentless illness and passed away while he was still in swaddling clothes. Mustafa had been both mother and father to his son, raising him with grace and virtue, shielding him from every harm. Yet in the unerring ledger of fate, the time allotted for Mustafa had come to an end. A sudden epidemic that descended upon the town brought that brave, mountain-like man to his sickbed. Wasting away as the days passed, struggling even to draw breath, Mustafa realized he was living his final moments and grasped the hands of his brother Hasan, who wept at his bedside. Mustafa's hands were burning with fever, but his grip was so firm that Hasan saw the profound desperation in his brother's eyes at that moment. "My brother, my dear brother," Mustafa said with labored breath, "I am leaving. The end of the road is in sight. I have no great estate to leave behind, no vast fortune, but I leave you a trust more precious than all the world's. I entrust my orphan, my Ali, who weeps silently in that corner, to you. He is now your child as well. Do not let him bow his head in sorrow. Be both mother and father to him. Feed him what you eat and clothe him as you clothe yourself."
The rights of an orphan are sacred. They shake the very foundations of the heavens. Please, do not leave him to freeze in the bitter frost of abandonment. Hasan, at that moment, in front of everyone in the room, kissed his brother's hands, feigning tears. "Rest easy, my brother," he swore. "He is my own flesh and blood. May God curse me if I ever treat him differently than my own son Murat." Upon hearing these words, Mustafa breathed a deep sigh of relief. A peaceful smile spread across his face as he recited the declaration of faith and drew his final breath. Once the funeral was over and the prayers were said, after the crowds had dispersed, the true apocalypse began for Ali. As soon as his brother was laid to rest, Hasan took Ali by the hand and led him to his large, opulent home. Hasan's wife, Jamile, was as merciless as her husband, a woman whose face radiated arrogance and who worshipped worldly possessions. She had raised her own son Murat with indulgence, providing him with the very best of everything. When they stepped through the door, Jamile looked at little Ali, his clothes covered in dust, his eyes swollen from the grief of losing his father, with such disgust as if a stray, diseased animal had been brought into the house rather than an orphan. "Hasan," she hissed through gritted teeth, "is our home an orphanage? We can barely feed ourselves. Where did you find this stray? I will not care for him." Hasan had already forgotten the solemn oath he had made to his brother only hours before. "Be quiet, woman," he whispered. "What would people say? They would say he threw his brother's orphan onto the streets before the body was even cold. Give it some time. We will work him so hard that he earns every morsel he eats. We shall use him as a servant in this house." Although little Ali did not hear these whispers, he could feel the darkness of his fate through his aunt's icy glares, even with his innocent child's heart. Ali's first night in that house was merely a preview of the cruelty he would endure for the rest of his life.
While Jamila prepared downy beds for her own son Murat, she laid out an old straw mat for Ali in the house's coldest, darkest cellar, a place where the wind pierced through the wooden gaps like a knife. "You will sleep here, Ali," she declared. "You will rise before the roosters crow to clean the stable. In this house, there is no such thing as a free meal." That night, Ali tried to sleep, shivering on that thin mat, curled into his own tear-soaked arms as he searched for the lingering scent of his father. From the very next day, A life of servitude officially began for Ali. Before the sun had even risen, in the biting frost, he would draw dozens of buckets of water from the well, chop wood until his hands cracked and bled from the cold, muck out the stables, and then run every errand for the household. The weight upon his shoulders was far more than a slender 10-year-old boy should ever have to bear. Yet Ali never complained. He gritted his teeth so as not to grieve his father's soul, seeking refuge in his Creator. Months turned into months. Winter gave way to spring, and spring to the scorching summer. But the freezing winter of Ali's life never truly ended. Jamila forced Ali to wear the tattered, patched rags that Murat had outgrown, feeding him nothing but stale crumbs and burnt scraps from the table instead of fresh bread. Murat mocked Ali's desperation, pushing and shoving him with his mother's silent approval, spilling his food on the ground and laughing. Hasan, meanwhile, turned a blind eye and a deaf ear to it all, focusing only on the profit he reaped from the labor of this orphan who worked his fields for nothing. Ali grew pale, his bones began to protrude, and his childish smile vanished entirely. The townspeople witnessed his wretched state and cursed Hasan under their breath, but Hasan was so powerful and ruthless that no one dared to stand before him and ask why he inflicted such cruelty upon a defenseless orphan.
It was a winter evening. Outside, a ferocious blizzard raged, blinding the eyes and freezing the very breath in one's lungs. The wind howled like a predatory beast as it battered the adobe walls of the house. Inside Hasan's home, however, a massive stove roared with fire, turning the interior into a sweltering sanctuary. That evening, Jamile had prepared a lavish spread of countless dishes. At the center sat a steaming platter of braised meat, buttery rice, and fresh, warm village bread. The vibrant hues of grape compotes glistened, while the aroma of the feast permeated every corner of the house. Ali had spent the entire day hauling wood from the forest and mucking out the barn in that bone-chilling cold. Trembling from exhaustion and hunger, he had retreated into a corner of the kitchen. His stomach was hollow, and he rubbed his bruised, frost-bitten hands together, desperate for warmth. Hasan, Jamile, and their son Murat took their places at the head of the table. Murat ate greedily, smacking his lips, carelessly tossing the fatty morsels he disliked to the edge of the table. From his corner, Ali watched the feast, swallowing hard. Not a single warm morsel had passed his lips for days. His dizziness and the gnawing pangs of hunger had reached an unbearable peak. Little Ali could endure no more. Driven by the faint hope that a moment of mercy might touch his uncle's heart, he rose slowly. With his head bowed and steps faltering, he approached the edge of the table. "Uncle," he said, his voice cracking into a mere whisper, "I have been on my feet since dawn, and my stomach is empty. Not much, just a piece of that dry bread from the corner, and perhaps a little of that rice. I swear I will work harder tomorrow. I will chop even more wood." Ali's innocent, desperate plea brought a momentary silence to the room. But this silence was merely the calm before the storm. Jamile's eyes bulged with sudden fury. She slammed her wooden spoon onto the table with such force that the glasses rattled and jumped. "Who do you think you are, trying to share our food, you wretched beggar?" she shrieked.
You feast upon my bread all day. You seek refuge under my roof, and yet you have the gall to covet my son's meat pilaf? Provoked by his wife's outburst, Hasan unleashed the diabolical arrogance and cold-blooded cruelty lurking within his soul. The promise made to his brother, the sacred oath sworn before God, none of it mattered to him anymore. Rising in a fit of rage, he seized Hasan by his frail collar, hoisted him into the air, and hurled him onto the floor. Ali struck the cold stone floor, writhing in agony. Indifferent to the tears of his orphaned nephew, Hasan loomed over him and uttered those chilling words that would haunt the memory for years to come. "Did your father leave us vast estates or chests overflowing with gold that you feel entitled to a seat at my table? You have become a heavy burden upon our lives, draining us like a parasite. We feed you for nothing, and yet you expect to dine on meat like a nobleman? Your insatiable greed knows no bounds. Get out! Tonight there shall be no food, no water, and no shelter for you in this house. You have bled my household dry, you wretched orphan. he bellowed. Drowning in tears, Ali prostrated himself at his uncle's feet. "Uncle, please, a tempest is raging outside. The frost is deadly, and the wolves have descended upon the villages. I beg of you, do not cast me out. I swear I will never ask for food again. I will sleep on the stone floor of the cellar and remain silent," he pleaded. But Hasan's heart had turned to stone. He showed no mercy. Seizing Ali by the collar, he dragged him toward the front door. Jamila snickered in the shadows, while Murad watched his father's cruelty with sadistic delight. In the midst of that biting cold and the howling storm, Hasan threw open the heavy wooden door. He cast the 10-year-old orphan, Ali, out into the snow, the frost, and the abyss of darkness like a piece of refuse, slamming the door shut in his face. Then he slid the heavy iron bolt into place.
As Ali fell into the knee-deep snow, the wind pierced through his thin shirt, freezing him to the bone. Tears instantly turned to ice upon his cheeks. He pounded on the door, crying out, "Uncle, please open up, I am going to freeze." But from within, there came only the crackle of the stove and the sound of laughter. Ali realized that door would never open again. His feet had begun to freeze, and his body grew weary from the constant shivering. Only one place of refuge, one final door to turn to, came to his mind. The desolate cemetery on the outskirts of the village, exposed to the wind. His father's soil. In the darkness of the night, struggling through the knee-deep snow, falling and rising again, he began to walk toward the graveyard. The howling of wolves mingled with the sound of the wind, yet the immense pain within Ali suppressed even the fear of death. When he found his father's snow-covered grave, he collapsed face down onto the frozen earth. He began to claw at the earth with his hands, clinging to his father's headstone. "Father," he wailed toward the dark sky. "Father, where are you? You said my uncle would look after me, that he would never let me be cold. Father, they threw me out. For a morsel of bread, they chased me away like a dog. I am so cold, Father. Please take me with you. Oh God, please take my soul and save me from this torment," he choked through his sobs. That night, at the foot of that headstone, as he was about to lose consciousness from the cold, Ali let out a sigh so deep, so full of grievance, that it pierced the layers of the sky and reached the divine throne. That sigh was born not just of words, but of frozen tears and the shattered heart of a child. As the storm subsided toward dawn, an elderly, radiant-faced merchant, stranded with his caravan while passing through the town, noticed that small body buried in the snow at the edge of the cemetery. He leapt from his horse and rushed to Ali's side. The boy's pulse was faint, his lips turned blue.
The merchant immediately wrapped Ali in his furs, placed him on his horse, and without a word to anyone, sped away from that merciless town. For days, Ali lay in the merchant's caravan, burning with fever. Having no children of his own, the old merchant treated Ali with paternal tenderness, nursed him back to health, and took him to a distant sprawling city, his own homeland. When Ali awoke, he told the old man that he did not wish to return to his uncle, recounting the horrors of that terrible night. Overwhelmed by the boy's story, the merchant wept and said, "You are now a trust sent to me by God, my son. From this day forth, you shall be my own child." Years flowed by, like the snow on mountain peaks melting only to fall once more. Though time seemed to turn pain into ashes, the scales of fate were working silently to establish their perfect balance. Growing up by the old merchant's side, Ali was raised with his discipline, his honesty in trade, and a profound sense of justice. His master had taught him not only how to buy and sell goods, but how to touch the human heart, to be a master of mercy, not of money. When the old man passed away, he bequeathed his entire fortune, his vast shops, and his caravans to Ali. By the time Ali reached his 30s, he had become the most respected, wealthy, and generous merchant of that distant city. No poor soul who came to his door ever left empty-handed, and no one in distress departed without finding a remedy. People began to call him not just Ali the merchant, but Ali Bey, friend of the forsaken. His wealth was legendary, yet he never succumbed to pride. Every night as you laid his head on his pillow, he never forgot that snowy night or the coldness of that gravestone. Meanwhile, in the cruel town where Ali was born, the wheels of fate had begun to turn in the opposite direction for Hasan and his family. After casting Ali out, nothing ever went right in Hasan's life again.
That night, the orphan's lament began to descend upon Hasan's life, settling over him like a slow, creeping nightmare. First, his vast fields, the very source of his pride, were descended upon by a swarm of locusts, the likes of which the town had never seen. Leaving the surrounding lands untouched, this plague withered Hasan's crops to the very root. Not a single grain of wheat remained. Desperate to cover his losses, Hasan turned to moneylenders, sinking into debt. Then, in the dead of night, a fire of unknown origin suddenly erupted within the great barn where he kept his winter stores and his flock. As the cries of the animals rose to the heavens, Hasan's entire fortune turned to ash before his very eyes. The more water he threw, the more the flames seemed to roar, refusing to be extinguished. Hasan was on the verge of losing his mind, yet the chain of calamities was far from over. His own son, Murat, that wayward soul, turned to theft to pay off gambling debts once his father's coffers ran dry. In the middle of the night, he stole his father's final few gold coins and fled the town. Gemily was devastated by her husband's ruin and the betrayal of her only son. Her heart could no longer bear such immense sorrow. The very mouth she had used to mock others in her pride was struck by paralysis. She was rendered speechless and, shortly thereafter, breathed her last. Hasan, the once cruel man who had been the wealthiest in the village, was now left utterly alone in that hollow mansion. The moneylenders arrived at his doorstep, seizing the very roof over his head. Hasan had been reduced to a beggar sleeping on the streets, a man to whom passers-by would toss a scrap of bread out of pity. Clad in rags, the old man's condition was truly wretched. Crushed under the suffocating weight of hunger, misery, and isolation, Hasan realized he could no longer find a place for himself in this town.
A piece of news he heard from passing caravans became a final glimmer of hope for him. He had heard that in a great city days away, there lived a wealthy and merciful merchant known as the friend of the stranger, who helped everyone who came to his door and left no one hungry or destitute. Casting his pride aside completely, Hasan decided to set out for that great city. He spent that arduous journey of many days walking, clinging to the back of horse-drawn carriages, and shivering from the cold in the stables of inns at night. On the road, he felt as if he would faint from hunger, struggling to take each step while leaning on his cane. He muttered to himself, "Oh, what a fool I was," he thought. "If only I hadn't kept those fields for myself when my brother died and squandered the wealth, I wouldn't be in this state now." Yet he was still unaware of his true great sin, the cruelty he had inflicted upon the orphan. After weeks of that grueling journey, he reached the great city, the city where Ali lived. By making inquiries, he arrived before the famous vast caravanserai and its endless rows of shops. Hundreds of workers were laboring inside, loading and unloading crates full of merchandise. In front of the caravanserai, a queue stretched for meters. The poor, the destitute, and widows had joined that line, waiting for the alms to be given by the merchant known as the friend of the stranger. Hasan took his place at the very end of the line, his legs trembling and his clothes in tatters. He waited for hours. The sun beat down upon him, and his lips were parched with thirst. When his turn finally came, he was led into a courtyard with massive wooden gates. In the corner of the courtyard, seated upon a large divan, was Ali, wearing a kaftan of fine fabric, his beard neatly trimmed, his face radiating an indescribable dignity and light. He listened to the grievances of everyone who came before him, settling the debts of some and bestowing pouches of gold upon others. When it was Hasan's turn, leaning on his cane, Hasan approached Ali with trembling steps and knelt down, bowing his head. He did not even have the courage to lift his eyes. "My lord," Hasan said, his voice trembling and tearful,
I have come from afar, from a mountain town. Once I was very wealthy, I had everything, but fate turned its wheel against me. My crops burned, my goods turned to ash, and my son abandoned me. I am left penniless and homeless. I am starving, begging from door to door. I have heard of your supreme mercy. Please, grant me some charity, a place to take refuge, so that I do not die in the streets in this bitter winter." When Ali looked at this old man, doubled over, disheveled, and sounding so pitiful, he was thunderstruck. Years had passed. Hasan's hair had turned stark white, his face was covered with wrinkles, and his once upright posture had completely vanished. But Ali recognized his uncle instantly by his voice and the cowardice that remained behind those cruel eyes. His mind immediately returned to that horrific winter night, 20 years ago. The aroma of the meat pilaf on the table, the lump in his throat as he tried to swallow, the calloused hands seizing his collar, and the moment he was thrown into the snow came alive before his eyes. That merciless voice saying, "Did your father leave us estates and wealth? You have become a burden on our livelihood," echoed in his ears. Ali's heart began to pound. Before him, the man who had ruined his life and left him to die was now kneeling at his door, begging for a piece of bread. It was the perfect opportunity for vengeance, to settle the score for the agony of those past days. If he wished, he could have his guards beat him and cast him out, making him suffer 1,000 times the kicks he had endured years ago.
But Ali saw right before him, in the person of his uncle, what malice and pride could do to a man. He had learned mercy from his father and forgiveness from his master. Ali rose slowly from the divan where he sat. He took measured steps toward Hasan. Hasan continued to tremble, staring at the shoes of the magnificent merchant standing before him. Ali leaned down, took his uncle by the shoulders, and slowly raised him to his feet. "Hasan," Ali said, his voice so deep and powerful that everyone in the courtyard fell silent. "Are you not that Hasan Aga, the man who relied so much on himself, shared with no one, and whom everyone in town feared?" Hasan looked up in shock. He stared at Ali's face in horror, wondering how this merchant knew his name and his past. When he saw Ali's familiar eyes, so like his father's, a bolt of realization struck Hasan's mind. His pupils dilated, his knees felt ready to buckle once more, and his breath caught in his throat. "You," Hasan whispered, his tongue parched. "You, my brother Mustafa's." "Yes," Ali said, as a single tear rolled down his cheek. "I am the one who was a heavy burden on your soul, the one to whom you begrudged even a single morsel of bread at your table. I am that orphan Ali whom you cast out like a dog into that freezing storm, the Ali you threw into the snow because he was a burden, the one for whom you made my father turn in his grave." Upon hearing these words, Hasan felt as if scalding water had been poured over him. He collapsed where he stood, covered his face with his hands, and began to wail, choked with sobs. He wished to sink into the earth, to become dust and blow away right then and there. "My God," Hasan cried out, "how great you are, O Lord! You did not leave the cry of the oppressed unanswered. The cruelty I inflicted that night has brought me to this orphan's door like a dog."
"Strike me, Ali. Take your sword and take my head. Do not give me even a single drop of water. I have no right to sit at your table. I showed you no mercy. I betrayed the legacy your father entrusted to me. He crawled on the ground begging, 'Throw me into the snow just as I did to you.'" Ali looked with pity upon his uncle, this broken, shattered man who had felt the sting of divine justice. Mercy was the ultimate pinnacle of justice. Ali signaled to his men. "Lift him up," he said. "Take him to the bath, wash him, and dress him in the cleanest of garments. Then settle him in the finest, warmest room of my mansion. Place before him a feast of various dishes, meat pilafs and warm bread." Hasan looked at Ali in disbelief. Are you forgiving me?" he asked, weeping. "Despite all the cruelty I inflicted upon you? Are you giving me bread?" Ali smiled. "Uncle," he said, "you closed the door on me that night, but God opened the gates of the heavens and the earth for me. You threw me into the snow for a mere crumb.
yet God granted me tables overflowing with sustenance. I forgive you, because I chose to be merciful like my father, Mustafa, not like you. At my table, there is always a place for the orphan, and even for the enemy who comes to the door. It is enough for a person to realize how pride and wealth have blinded them. That day, in the face of Ali's mercy, Hasan repented in tears. For the rest of his life, he lived in a corner of Ali's mansion, weeping upon his prayer rug, seeking atonement for his sins. The account of that winter night, when an orphan was cast out, was finally settled years later with such a merciful blow. Our story ends here, dear friends. Until we meet again in other exemplary tales, may you be entrusted to God.